Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Hidden Truths. And today we have Josh Barone, who is going to speak about a topic that I absolutely love. It's electric vehicles. There's a lot going on in that world. Hi, Josh. How's everything going?
Yeah, good. Everything's fine here. Electric vehicles are fairly cool. They're fast, and there's lots of them now. So,
For sure. I mean, a lot of people are wondering, is it the right time to buy an electric vehicle? What are the pros? What are the cons? So I'm sure you're going to be addressing all of that.
sure, we'll get into that.
I,
People don't realize how big the EV market really is because EVs in the US are just starting to become popular. But in China, for instance, 50% of the new registrations are EVs, and in Europe it's 30%, where US is about 10% of the registrations are EVs, which again, it's a small market in the US, but there's a lot of push. So there was 16 million units sold worldwide in 2021. A lot of information it has from 2021 because there was a congressional hearing about it. I pulled in a lot of information from that. But so EV sales in the US are supposed to double. They doubled in 2022 and they're supposed to double again in 2023. Now, if you listen to Elon Musk, he's not saying that. He's saying, and if you look at his inventories right now, his inventories are up. And he's basically saying there's the global recession. And if you listen to us, you know, we saw that coming for a while. But Elon's started to talk about that. And essentially the Model 3 in his production lot, which is a very cool model, actually, is starting to pile up. So you might see discounts on those in the future. I think he just had a price reduction announced maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
That means the world is kind of pushing this, and it's not just our government, but it's a bunch of governments. So there's this program, this marketing program, it's called EV30 at 30. And essentially what it's after is getting 30% of the global registrations to be EV by 2030. So that's a big push. The estimates are for 200 million units globally by 2030. So you can see we're going from 16 million to 200 million by 2030. That's a lot of demand for EV and EV materials. And EVs differ from conventional cars. And I do have a chart of that. Essentially, there is a lot of different kinds of metals and much more metal in an EV than there is in a conventional gas-powered car. Essentially, mining is the dirty secret of EVs. There's a lot of mining involved for these metals, and mainly for the battery pack. That's the real metal consumer. It's estimated that there's a 6-fold demand for lithium batteries coming. That was from an indigenous guy, Benchmark Materials, basically saying there's forward-looking, there's a huge increase in demand for this. If you're from Reno, like we are, then you know about the Panasonic Tesla factory, the 1 million square foot factory out, I guess it's east of town. And what's interesting about that factory, that Panasonic factory, essentially is what it is that of the US battery packs sold in EVs last year, they all came from that factory, essentially, maybe a few from here and there, but most of them came from that factory. That's kind of interesting, especially it puts a local perspective on it for us. So if there's a 6-fold increase, there's estimated to be that they're going to have to open 3,850 new mines. So 385 new mines worldwide to produce all these goods. That's a lot of mines. The other thing that's interesting in EV materials is that China essentially controls the whole supply line. And that's not in terms of just mining, although there's certain elements that are only found in China, but in processing as well. There's not a lot of processing in North America. All the materials are shipped to China, processed, and then shipped out back. That's another problem. Essentially, if you look back in the 70s when you had the gas line and OPEC not exporting oil to us, we all want to get off oil, right? But are we just changing one master for the other? If it's OPEC's not supplying us oil and now we're EV dependent and we're dependent on all supply lines from China, do they become our new master?
And that's important to remember because a lot of people are buying electric vehicles because we think it's better for the environment. And we know that is really not the case, right?
Well, so if you think EVs are clean,
Yeah.
Typically, you'll think that mines are very dirty, and mines are very dirty. I mean, think about what they're doing. They're digging up something to grab something to process it. Typically, the digging or the process is through either different methodologies, but the processing tends to involve chemicals that are toxic to the environment to leach out the minerals that we're looking for. So the fact that you're opening a whole bunch of new mines, it makes it somewhat of a dirty industry. On top of that, the electricity produced to charge your EV is typically dinosaur power or natural gas. That's the predominant source of energy in this country. So they're somewhat clean and they're somewhat not clean. But again, it's the evolution of the auto industry. Let's not go against it too much. Maybe, if you're Elon Musk, you start cleaning this stuff up. So let's get a little bit in. So again, you're kind of hearing me. Mines are dirty. So a lot of the reasons supply chains in China is low environmental standards. There's not problems in getting the rights to do these things from the government, and child labor. So labor costs are low. They don't care about the environment, and they're not going to withhold permitting for environmental reasons. So that's a lot of reasons why the supply lines are in China. So here's another country that in cahoots with China is Indonesia. Now, Indonesia, if you follow Indonesia at all, they're fairly interesting because they like to ban exports of things. They just recently banned the export of palm oil out of the country. And essentially, it's a price control mechanism. So Indonesia banned nickel a few years back. And the reason is that they wanted to attract heavy industry into the country to process the materials, and then export refined products, battery packs, whatever. And that worked. And they're in cahoots in a project with China to do this. And that company is the biggest refiner of nickel in the world, and in this industrial park. Well, guess what the industrial park is powered by? Coal. It's 3,000 hectares, so it's a huge complex, and it has manganese processors, and it's got its own seaports and everything. So the locals say that the waters there are unfishable now because there's been so much pollution from this industrial complex into the waters and surrounding areas. So you're getting this idea, the dirty secret is mining. So that's Indonesia. But again, Indonesia's price controlling nickel essentially by doing that, bringing in commerce and boosting their economy because they have low environmental standards and they can be processed there cheaply. Our administration, you would think, very democratic, liberal administration, very environmentally friendly. Not when it comes to EV. They have huge mandates to push EV onto its citizenry, that they are foregoing environmental research on mines. In fact, they're overturning mining laws that were set in the 1800s to allow for these materials to be mined and permitted to get the mines going, because they're viewing these metals as they're pushing this onto us, EVs onto us, as national security issues. Which is kind of smart. The tensions between our government and the Chinese government are getting tense. There's Taiwan. They did that huge bill to bring over the chips manufacturing back to the US. Again, they're getting out of the way of mining because we need these materials, right? It's called the Rosemont decision. And essentially, fundamentally, it has to do with mineral rights on properties. But in reality, it's about changing the way that resource discoveries in mining are viewed in terms of rights. Typically, you have to go through this process to prove there's a resource there, and then you can use the surrounding properties for tailings and processing. So they're changing that idea where you have to prove it to, hey, I think there's resources there, so then I can use the surrounding area for tailings. And that's really what the administration is overturning, is this Rosemont rule. And again, this is big decisions because it has a lot to do locally with a lot of the lithium projects that are going on. So this Rosemont decision allowed this big lithium project to go forward in Nevada. Depending on what side of it you are, if you're on the mining side, that's what you want to see. Don't forget, Nevada has lots of mining in it. As a Nevadan, we like mining. So of the EV, okay, 30 to 40% of the cost of the EV is in the battery pack. The rest of it is not as expensive, less of the cost. And of that 30% cost, the electrode part of the battery is another 20 or 40% of that cost. So the electrode, that's where a lot of the rare metals are in the electrodes and anode. And the middle is where they hold things is a lot of lithium. Lithium is not super expensive and it's abundant. Okay. So let's talk about the metals that are in EVs, because again, this is really where we're going.
Yeah, and there have been some major discoveries in that area too. I know you're going to mention Peru and Chile, but I heard also they started to find this type of precious metals in other countries as well. So anyway,
as the price goes up, they tend to find more things as it's more profitable mine, right? Here's the main metals: copper, lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, graphite, zinc, and something they call rare earths. And we'll get into rare earths at the end. Copper, there's a few of these metals that we're not going to really talk about. They're very abundant. Copper is one of them. And again, they're easy to source. The government has this thing called the net import reliance number, and we're going to talk about this. But it's very important. It basically is how reliant are we on imports versus how much we produce at home. So we produce copper at home, but it's also globally abundant. It's very easy to get and it's price stable. The largest copper mines, again, I think we were talking about, are in Peru and Chile. And recently there's so much demand, not just from EVs, but home building, copper is used a lot of places, that it's caused massive labor strikes in those countries, in these mines. And God, I think it was about 3 months ago, there was a big labor strike in Chile and Peru over wages and fairness. And again, typical mining things, safety of the miners, detriment to the environment, and that kind of thing. Big strike. So as we EV up and there's more dependence on these metals, you're going to see more and more of this go on. And you already are. So again, there's strikes in Chile and Peru. They strike a lot. They're kind of like France, maybe not quite as bad, but they're always unhappy about something.
There's always a reason to complain about something, right?
Yeah. The next metal thing that we're going to talk about, lithium. Not a heavy NRI score, a net imports reliance score of 25, less than 25. So fairly abundant, and we're not really import sensitive to it. If you look at where lithium is, there's big lithium finds in Nevada. That's where a lot of the projection is going. So 100 metric tons of lithium produced globally. There's 2 new mining projects. I think I talked about one in Nevada, one in North Carolina. The first one is called the Norum Lithium Corp, 600 metric tons per year over 40 years. That one's in Nevada. Ioneer is 20 metric tons of lithium over 26 years. I don't know what they produce yearly. That's what they say, how big the find is. And then the one in North Carolina, the Piedmont Lithium, is 30,000 metric tons over 20 years. So again, these last 2 aren't huge finds, but again, they're adding to domestic supply. And then the pricing of lithium is on the way up. Why? Because there's demand for batteries everywhere. So in 2021, it was 17,000 a metric ton. And lowest was in the last 5 years, $8,000 in 2020. And then in 2023, prices are up and it's $37,000 per metric ton.
Wow, that's a major difference.
Yeah, so very much pushing up. So some of the ideas here is if you're looking to make money in EVs, maybe you look at the metals that are involved in creating them. Yeah. So let's move on. Next metal would be nickel. Net import reliance score of 48. So not as abundant in the US, and we are importing it. I want to say the biggest finds are in Tunisia. They're the largest production worldwide, 1 million metric tons a year. We're importing from them. Global production is 2,700,000 metric tons. One US producer, Eagle Mines in Michigan, produces about just shy of 200,000 metric tons a year. Canada is a big US supplier of nickel, Indonesia being the biggest. And here comes the pricing, okay? The pricing is interesting. So in 2021, 18,000 a metric ton. In 27, it was 10,400 metric ton, and in 2023, $43,770 a metric ton. So again, large increase. Makes sense. Nickel is in mid battery packs. Nickel's heavily used in the points, not in the.
No, I get it, but still, like, I mean, that's a huge increase in what, just a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. Next one is manganese. So the US doesn't produce any manganese. Okay. It's 100% imported. Okay. So again, this is why the administration is saying, hey, that is a problem. We need to find some, we need to do it, we need to do something. Manganese is a little bit weird, funky, because it's created in deprived deep ocean settings. So there's some technological problems to mining it. You have to, you're mining in deep water, kind of like oil mining, but a little bit different because it's not a liquid, it's not, you're not pulling it up. Where am I? So no US production. South Africa is where it all comes from. There's 20 million metric tons produced a year. South Africa produces 7.4 million of that. Pricing, so it's not real expensive metal. Pricing was $5.20 per metric ton in 2021, $4.59 in 2020, and $4.50 in 2023. So it's somewhat abundant. It's not used heavily. It's used in the motor part and some other parts of the car where you need. It's in the points too, but it has magnetic kind of stuff to it. So anyway, moving on. Cobalt. Cobalt is really important in the high performance version batteries of EVs. So if you have a high performance EV, the points have a lot of cobalt in them. 76% imported, NRI score of 76%. So not a lot in the US, but we have some. Global production of 170,000 metric tons a year. 70% of what we produce in the US is recycled out of other things. So it's not like the production we have in the US isn't real production where we're pulling it out of the ground. Essentially, we're saving it out of other things, and that's where our production is of it. Eagle Mines in Michigan, only domestic producing mine. This is where one of the real problems with cobalt is. The biggest producer of cobalt is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, Democratic Republic of Congo has 120 metric tons of the 170 produced, so almost all of it. They use a method of mining called artisanal mining. Do you have any idea what that is?
No.
Picture a ton of very impoverished people digging with their hands and putting mud and metals into a basket and then running it to a production area and getting paid pennies on what they found. Okay.
The techniques that are applied in China. I mean, that's very similar, I'm sure.
Yeah. So that's artisanal mining. Think about blood diamonds and all that stuff in South Africa. Very similar in terms of how they're doing it. Maybe they're not using guns to force people to do it, but very, child labor, all kinds of harmful practices that, as a consumer, you don't want to be involved in. Essentially, that's cobalt that's coming out of that country. That's how they mine it. So, maybe that EV isn't so clean when you start looking at it from that kind of perspective. And maybe gas-powered cars, which are the metals and gas-powered cars aren't so bad. Plus, Saudi Arabia is not using, child labor to pull oil out of the ground. So again, this is one of the big problems with EVs is where this metal comes from, how it's mined, how dirty it is, environmental, labor costs. This bothers me. I hope that comes across.
Well, yeah, there's a big humanitarian issue here. It's not just an environmental problem. It is humanitarian.
Yeah.
And people need to be aware of that. Now, is it going to truly change their purchasing decisions? I'm not sure, but
no, I don't think Americans. I don't think a lot of people know about this stuff.
Yeah.
I think that they view EV as very, it's for sold very market is very clean tech. The future of tech is going to clean up the world, but we never talk about this kind of stuff. And again, let's get into the pricing. The pricing is kind of weird here. So in 2021, it was 61, just call it $62,000 per metric ton. In 2019, it was 22,000 a metric ton. In 2023, it's about roughly 40,000 a metric ton. So it's higher than it was in 2019, but it's off of the 2021 prices.
It makes you wonder what changed. What changed from the initial $61 to $40?
It could be that there's some, you're having companies go into Congo and modernize some of the things, or there's more of it on market than there was before as these mines are growing up.
Right.
There's a couple more important metals. The last one is graphene. Graphite, I think of graphene as a complex off the thing. 100% imported. We don't have it. We don't produce it. There's globally production is 1 million metric tons a year. No US production. There is new mines opening, one in Alaska, one in Alabama. China is the largest US supplier. 33% of graphite comes from China. China is also the highest producer of graphite, 820,000 metric tons, so almost the whole 1 million of what's produced. Graphite's not super expensive, and it's used to separate the lithium out into cells in the battery. $1,600 a metric ton in 2021. In 2019, it was low at $1,350, and in 2023, it's $2,600. So again, it basically all comes from China, and they're refining it and shipping it to us. Right. Zinc again is another metal used. It's heavily abundant, so we're not going to talk about it. And then there's this last metal called rare earths. And rare earths includes several different things, but in EVs, it's really talking about this thing called, and I'm probably going to mess up the enunciation of this, it's called neodymium. Okay, it's essentially, it is a magnetic element and it's used in the motors. So why does a Tesla motor go so fast? Because it has this rare earth. It's a rare earth motor, magnet motor, and this rare earth has a very heavy magnetic pull. It moves the engine really, really fast. That's why Teslas are really fast. 100% Chinese controlled and processed. So again, you can't say enough that the Chinese government is really involved in EVs. Again, 50% of their new registrations are EVs. So, they're very much ahead of us in this game, even though they have more coal-fired plants than anywhere else in the world, and more pollution's coming out of that country than anywhere else, other place in the world.
That is true. Isn't that neodymium? Isn't that what they found somewhere in England, a small area that had a high percentage of that type of rare earth?
You're correct, and again, it's one of the reasons that they don't talk about is why we were in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a huge resource of rare earths, right, that essentially went to China when we pulled out. So again, don't know if the administration knew that, didn't know that, but that's, some people argue that was the reason that we were there. Some people argue the reason that we were in Iraq was for the oil. Again, you guys can make your own decisions on that. Back to the supply chain. So as we're getting I keep on saying that the supply chain is controlled by China, but as the US car manufacturers, don't forget we have the biggest car manufacturers in the world, as they push into this area, because one, CAFE standards are forcing them to, government's forcing them to, and consumer demand is going this way. The consumer is buying this product. So, there's a lot of, but the point is, as we're going this way, those supply lines of these elements are becoming more and more difficult for these companies. So, typically like Ford, for instance, if they're buying something, they'll buy it from a middleman and bring it in, but not in this case. The problem is that the metals are becoming so, you can see it in the pricing, less common on market, that the suppliers, these big manufacturers, are going direct and buying the resource directly from the mine. Now, Tesla's been doing this for years. It's one of the reasons that he is so bright, is that he just cut out the middleman, went direct, trying to bring the price of the product down to middle America, essentially.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. So there's 3 ways they're doing this. They're taking ownership in new mines. Again, there's 385 mines opening, and then loaning money to open these new mines, and then essentially buying futures of products. So prepaying for future delivery of metals. So those are the three ways they're doing it. Now, GM is, again, opening positions with mines. So $650 million stake in Lithium Americas. That's a Nevada project, to get that project up and going. So it's a new lithium mine in Nevada. There was protesting. Again, if you know where I'm at, the federal building's right across from the street. Maybe a year ago, there was protesting about this mine opening. The administration is pushing the permits through. So permitting a mine is not something, I kind of glossed over this. Permitting a mine takes roughly, it can take 11 months if there's no things, up to 11 years. So the administration pushing these registrations through by glossing over some of the current laws is really, again, pushing these mines to get open a lot faster than they normally would. GM is also taking a stake in Vail, which is one of the largest miners in the whole world, in their base metal division. So again, GM is looking at this. GM pushes the Hummer is all electric. They're getting into this as well. Tesla's been buying direct for a long time, but Tesla's really smart in the way they engineer things, and we'll get into that when we get into the evolution of this. But essentially, they're building a new lithium refinery factory in Texas. Again, they put it in Texas because Texas gave them a bunch of tax benefits, even though they have to truck the material from Texas, refine it there, and then truck it back to Reno. Not the smartest thing, but the tax breaks are probably worth it for them to do that. And then is considering taking over something called Sigma Lithium Corp. So again, buying positions so they can secure future output of metals. Volkswagen, smaller player, but Audi, which is Volkswagen brand, is essentially saying they're going to be all electric. The whole fleet of Audi is going to be electric by 2030. So they're forming joint ventures, and then they have a deal with something called Vulcan Energies, which is in Germany. So I mentioned loans. They're doing loans for these mines. I mentioned prepayment. They're doing that.
Yeah.
So now here's the fun part. Okay, so here's where the tech starts coming in. And again, if you're from Nevada, you're from Reno, you know about these companies. So recycling. So as the battery packs, just like the battery pack in your computer, that you get irritated because after about 2 years it doesn't hold a charge anymore, right? Comes to essentially the battery packs have a useful life and they come to end of life. Well, same with the EVs. So the battery packs, which again 40% of the cost of the vehicle, has an end of life. So I think it was 200 metric tons of EV batteries will each reach end of life by 2027. So the battery pack is less than 10 years in useful life in an EV is what it sounds like to me. Maybe you can push them longer, but essentially that's the problem. Some people look at an EV as it's essentially disposable. They last about 10 years and then you get rid of them, dispose of them, and then come back. Well, do you know the average life of an automobile on market right now is 17 to 20 years? They have about half-life of like a truck that I drive 300,000 miles, right?
It's incredible. I mean, I don't know if those batteries can be recycled, but that's a major issue.
Yeah, so this is what we're talking about. So these end-of-life batteries, they're being recycled. There's 2 companies doing it. There's more than 2 companies doing it, but I like to keep it local. So the 2 companies are Redwood Materials, they're in Carson City, and then another company called American Battery Company, and they're publicly traded. It's a penny stock. It's not, it trades at under $2, but these companies are getting big grants to grow up. Now, Redwood Materials is run by a guy that used to work at Tesla. And here's something that people don't know. I think it's greater than 10% of new battery cells coming out of Panasonic are initially bad. Now, I'm sure they're working on production to make them better, but they're initially bad. So they essentially go to the recycler directly. They're produced, they're bad, they go to the recycler, the materials are then ripped out and given back. So that is one of Redwood's first contracts. That's how it's a good company. It's a private company. And if it ever went public, I'd probably buy shares of it, but it's not. Again, that's one of their first contracts, is just recycling the bad batteries coming off the Tesla line. So recycling is going to be a big business here in the future of EVs. It's going to be a very big business because, again, there's these, we don't produce all these metals, so why not save what we can, reuse them, keep the supply high.
Yeah, if everything in the battery can be recycled, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
It's not everything in the battery can be recycled, but most of it can. And again, you're going to recycle those, especially those expensive heavy metals, right? And if the price keeps on going up, you're going to recycle more and more and become more a fashion. Right. So let's talk about the evolution of and it's mainly in Tesla. Tesla's really they're way out ahead of everybody. Now, the industry will probably catch them at some point, but nobody's near them now. One, their engines are way more technically advanced than the other people's engines. This evolution of the battery itself is pretty advanced. So say what you want about Elon Musk. You might not like what he says. He probably doesn't care if you like it or not. But everybody I know that knows him or has worked for him say that he's a brilliant engineer. Okay, so let's just take that at face. He's a brilliant engineer, or he has brilliant engineers working for him. Any way you take it, that's fine. What they're looking for in this Panasonic factory now out in Paso Reno is efficiencies. So a lot of these materials have to be processed. Lithium has to be processed into something that they can adhere in a battery pack. So Tesla came out with this thing called the biscuit battery pack. And they probably came out with this a year or 2 years ago. But essentially, it was a way to get around some of the refining process of the material, and in a way that they also were able to use it to stiffen the rigidity of the car itself. So again, you get two things. So what was he really after? About 10% efficiency in the supply line of lithium is what he was after when he did the biscuit battery. So it's not much efficiency, but again, that's what he's known for. It's like looking at something, figuring out how to do it differently to cut out some middlemen in the processing to make it somewhat more efficient. And that's what's really Tesla's about. So we were talking about rare earths, and you can enunciate the word better, neodymium, excuse me. And again, 100% metals coming from China. So Tesla's looking at ferrite magnets instead, okay? They don't have the pull that the other ones do. So they're engineering around that to get the same push out of the motors through technology, software, design, to get out of that supply chain. Again, this is really Tesla looking at the supply chain going, that's a problem. Hey, we can use this less desirable material, and then we'll engineer around the problem. And that's what he's really good at. So they're looking at that I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, so, this is smart. Plus, he can create easily a monopoly here, because being one of the first on the market, creating relationships with suppliers, taking over suppliers, I mean, that can create challenges for competition that's trying to grab market shares right now.
Yeah. The other thing that he did is I dare you to go look at the YouTube. It's pretty amazing, of this die caster that he has to essentially die cast the whole front end of the Model 3. They do that in his plant in California. And there's video of it actually working. It's the largest die casting machine ever invented. So part of EVs, why they're so desirable, is there's less moving parts. So there's I think on average, there's like 15,000 moving parts in an automobile on gas. And I want to say that is dramatically reduced in EVs. There's just not as many moving parts. And the less moving parts you get, the less it breaks down, right? The more efficient it is, the more you're not paying to have it maintenance because there's less to break. Yeah. So that's another efficiency that you get out of EVs. So do I think you should go buy an EV? It's personal taste. I don't think they're as clean as they're made out to be. I saw a number, it's like 20,000 miles of you have to drive it to take advantage, to just get it to carbon neutral.
What do you say? How many did you say? 30,000?
20,000 is the number I saw. Now I don't know how correct it is, but that's the number I saw. 20,000, you have to drive the car 20,000 miles just to get it to carbon neutral. Again, the way I look at, you have to understand the way I look at technology. You know, we're in maybe version 3 of the technology here. And as we go forward, especially with innovators like Elon Musk looking for efficiencies in the supply line, add to the fact that GM and all these other big manufacturers don't want to be caught using child labor. They'll clean up the mine, and they're directly involved with the mines. Those mines will then become cleaner, more environmentally friendly. But that's a dirty secret, that essentially there's tons of metals in these things, and mining is not a clean industry
No,
by
no,
any sort.
it's not. I mean, don't you think that Elon Musk, with his research and work on the rocket technology, can potentially also influence how his electric cars are built and improved, potentially? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he's not like from my understanding of him, he's a very brilliant engineer and can see outside the problem very, very well to create efficiencies. And he's always looking for minor efficiencies, not just major ones. I think that he'll clean up. Again, he's the leader in the tech, and I don't see why he would not be. Now, everybody's racing an EV to come up with the $35,000 model. I don't think that's really going to happen with the price of these commodities going up. I think it's still kind of, I hate to say it this way, but it's a rich man's car. The Model 3 brought it down, but my partner here has a Model 3, and I think he spent between $65,000 and $80,000 for it, and it's a nice car, but it's not that mid entry level car that they're shooting for. If you're going to buy an EV, it might not be a bad time to wait maybe 6 months when we view the economy to be really slow. And again, if they have lots of inventories, then you can pick one up for on a sweet deal, just because they're trying to move the model.
That's my take. I'm interested, but I think it's premature as far as I'm concerned, and I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait probably a year or two, who knows? But I think technology is going to be changing dramatically going forward. There will be some stock issues which will impact prices. So that's my take.
Yeah. So here's another little statistic for you. The rebuy. So typically Americans will buy the same manufacturer cars for a long time because they like them. So if you buy a truck, you tend to buy another truck, right? On EVs, the people don't repurchase them. And here's why. So if you buy a Tesla, you're not likely to buy a Tesla again in the future. People find them to be somewhat a pain in the butt in terms of having to charge them all the time, and that responsibility to plug them in every night. I heard one lady just said that was a pain. I hated it. I still got rid of it, and I went to gas, because going to the gas station every 2 weeks isn't that big of a deal. And I have freedom. There's so many of them around, and it doesn't take long to fuel a car. So there's still problems in repurchases, because again, if you're going on a trip, you have to stop. Even if you have supercharging, it's going to take you 30 minutes to 40 minutes to essentially refuel your car and get on the road, where gas.
And you have no guarantee to find a station. So depending on where you go, I mean, that's the big question mark, right?
Tesla has a big advantage there too, because they already have essentially a station rolled out nationally. So I mean, that's a problem for Ford. They don't have their own charging stations. So there's a couple different charging companies. There's like 3 of them, Tesla being one of them. So they're all going to have to essentially pay Elon to use his charging stations. That's another real issue with them. Again, my partner loves his. He's like, never goes to the gas station, but plugging in at night is not something that he doesn't care about. Doesn't bother him. But I could see that, like, hey, I live in an apartment. How do I plug this thing in at night? It just doesn't happen. So
yeah, I mean, I can see all these issues that people will and are taking into consideration. I mean, between the environment, between the labor abuse, the pricing and the charging. I mean, these are good questions to ask yourself before you make a purchase like that.
Don't forget longevity of the product. It's still designed to be somewhat throwaway. And I think they're designing it to be recycled, but essentially in my mind that you're still throwing it away in 10 years and you got to get another one. I drive a big pickup truck. I'll drive it for 10 years before I replace it. That's the difference. And even at 10 years, people would say I'm replacing it too quickly.
Yeah, well, potentially what can change that? Government policies. You never know what can happen potentially that can change the way the landscape is growing and evolving right now. That I think could be happening sooner than we think.
There's a big push to go away from oil and into this. Again, it's still dirty. Think about where the power is coming to charge it. Again, it's minor. Evolution will take care of these problems. Without consumer demand for the product, you don't get that evolution. So I'm not going to say I dislike the product. I like the product. I think EV is probably a good way to go, especially if we can develop the metals markets so that we're not reliant on importing them. You know, some of these metals will always be reliant on, but people like Elon will design around that problem, and hopefully that issue goes away. So again, I don't want to trade one master for the other, but again, without the evolution of the product, you don't get away from that. So dependence wise, I think it's probably the better way to go.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of unknown. I see things probably that will be taking place that we cannot anticipate at this point, but it's great information, Josh. I think this gives some good background and data as to what's happening during the construction process, where everything is purchased, and the efficiency and the overall economy that those vehicles offer to consumers. Great. Thank you so much for this information. Very valuable. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I love looking at this stuff. This is my world here.
Yeah, it's great info. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching. Remember to subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, ask your questions in the comments area. We love to have comments, we love to have questions, and we love interacting with you. Thank you again, and see you next time.